everyone, and welcome to another episode of Justice and Human Rights Talks presented to you by Northern Justice Watch. So in this episode, we have a very special guest, a good friend, in fact, of Northern Justice Watch, Professor Dr. Davut Akca. Dr. Akca, welcome, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So before we get into the content of today and some of the issues that we're going to be talking about, I'd like to very briefly and very quickly introduce Dr. Akca. Dr. Akca is an assistant professor at the Lakehead University with a PhD in forensic psychology from Ontario Tech University, a master's in criminology, also from Ontario Tech University, and a bachelor's in criminal justice. He currently studies investigative interviewing, policing, radicalization, and hate crimes, which is going to be mostly what he's also going to be talking about today. So once again, it's a pleasure having you here. So what we're going to talk about today is a recent research, doctor, that you've conducted along with Lakehead University. And before I get into the research itself, I'd like you to actually talk a little bit about it to our audience in terms of the content of this recent publication of yours, if you can, please.
Thanks so much, Tarek. Thanks for inviting me again. It's a pleasure for me as well. So the research is on the hate speech and hate crimes against a specific community who's living in Canada. Like the members of the community are currently living in Canada, but they have members across the world. The origin of the community is coming from Turkey, but they have an increasing number of existence in the Western countries, including Canada. So hate speech and hate crimes is currently a hot topic because of the increasing polarization among our societies, our communities, and this specific case is not an exception, unfortunately. The reason why we wanted to focus on this specific community is the increasing oppression against this specific group and the far-reaching impacts of the hate speech and hate crimes. And specifically when the hate speech is coming from the people of power, like politicians, and it goes beyond the borders of the country. It doesn't stay there. Like the hate speech becomes a detrimental weapon that affects individuals, communities, and the whole society and international level even. So that's why we needed to focus on this specific community. By the way, I need to give a little bit background, if you don't mind, about the Hizmet community, or in another name, Gülen movement or Hizmet movement. So as I said, the origin of the movement or the group is from Turkey, but they have existence in more than 170 countries. And for the last decade, there has been an increasing oppression against the group because of several reasons. The reasons for that oppression might be a topic for another podcast, but the current regime in Turkey, the current government in Turkey looks at almost all opposition groups and parties as threat to themselves. Like they label other groups and opponent groups as terrorists. And this hate speech, which is specifically a four-letter word, FETÖ, an acronym which they use to label the group as a terrorist group, although the group has nothing to do with violence, has been used as a weapon again, as I said. And as it is coming from the politicians, now this weapon, this word has become something that affects almost every aspect of their lives. And they had to flee from the country and seek refuge in Western countries, including Canada, as I said. Currently, it's estimated that there are around 15,000 members of the Hizmet community in Canada. They have like schools, education centers, cultural centers. They have interfaith dialogue activities. By the way, the movement is inspired by the teachings of the cleric in exile, whose name is Fethullah Gülen. He is living in Pennsylvania in the United States for more than 2 decades. So this is basically, in a nutshell, the movement. I don't want to go much deeper. Like if you're interested, you can just search on Google and see what the movement is all about. But we want to focus on this specific, the impacts of hate speech and hate crimes on this movement. So that's why we are interested in this research, and as a partnership between Lakehead University and Northern Justice Watch, we conducted this study.
Thank you. I mean, you spoke a lot about the purpose of the research, the background of the research, the community that you specifically focused as a part of this research. And as we talk a little bit more about this, can you give us more information about the content of it, as in what levels, for example, you conducted the surveys, or what were some of those focus aspect areas that you tried to focus on?
Of course. So this was a survey-based research. We basically conducted surveys with the members or affiliates or individuals who are affiliated with the movement who live in Canada. And the number of participants is what was 318. As I said, it's a representative sample because the number of individuals in Canada who are affiliated with the movement is around 15,000. So 318 is a good number. We basically asked the experiences, first of all, the hate crime experiences of these people and hate speech experiences of these people as victims. And then we asked them about the impacts of this hate speech. And we found that the impacts are multi-layered. Like there are individual level impacts on their psychology, on their way of life, on their lifestyle, and there are sociological impacts, which is on community level, like the Hizmet community, Hizmet movement as a whole, as a group, is negatively affected by the ongoing hate speech and hate crimes. And on the third layer, we have the public safety impacts, which is basically related to Canadian public safety, because Hizmet community is currently a part of the Canadian society, and there's an increasing polarization between the Hizmet community and the other Turkish community groups, or Hizmet community and other Muslim community groups. And the hate speech is a kind of an impact that has on this polarization. And the fourth level, we have the international level impacts, which is basically the facilitation of the hate speech on the espionage and surveillance activities of the current Turkish regime. So we can talk about a four-level, multi-layered impacts of hate speech and hate crimes, which is initiated by the current politicians, like the people in power in Turkey, specifically the President Erdogan and the Turkish government as a whole.
Mm-hmm. So you basically divide the research into those four different layers. And from my understanding, and correct me if I'm mistaken here, the findings then as a result are also in these four different levels, so to say. So I want to talk a little bit about the findings, but I'm sure since it's such a big research, it's better if we go step by step. So since you gave me these four layers, the individual, community level, public safety, and international, do you want to maybe start by talking a little bit about the individual level and what some of your findings were at this level in terms of the impact, basically?
Sure. So first of all, the experiences, the victimization of these people, the vast majority of the 318 participants, which is a representative sample again, said that they have experienced both verbal attacks and physical attacks because of their affiliation with the movement. So in terms of the verbal attacks, the four-letter word veto, the main hate speech rhetoric used by the President Erdogan and the Turkish government is also used by the offenders who attack these people. So 88% of the participants said that they were subjected to verbal attack when they were in Turkey. And interestingly, 59% of them said that they were attacked in Canada as well by these verbal attacks or the hate speech. And like, we need to separate hate speech and hate crimes. Hate speech is just verbal attack, but hate crimes include like threats, assault, and attacks against their buildings and establishments and all other crimes, violent crimes, which is like the motivation of that, again, is the hatred against the group. And 86% said that they were attacked online, like when they were in Turkey, and 65% said that they also were attacked online when they are in Canada. And other types of attacks they experienced were like physical attacks, property attacks, institutional damage, as I said. And interestingly, those who live in Canada, when they were in Canada, they were attacked by the Turkish embassy and consulate. Like the nature of that attack is obviously is not kind of like physical attack, but they were kind of assaulted verbally, or their request for services by those embassies and consulates were not met, were not answered by the embassy and consulate. And beyond that, the members of the consulates and embassy were involved in some sort of espionage activities, which we will talk in the last part of the research. But it was important to mention that as a result of these experiences, the participants had to change their lifestyles in both their lives in Turkey and Canada. Even in Canada, they had to, first of all, they had to move abroad, like they have to come to Canada and other Western countries. 80% said so. 80% of the participants had to move abroad. And 70% said that they started avoid walking in certain places. They improved their home security, like they started avoid attending their cultural and community events, like Hizmet community events, because of the impacts of the hate speech and hate crimes. And they stopped hanging with people from outside the community. They changed their neighborhoods, like more than half of them changed their neighborhoods, their apartments, their houses. They had to improve their vehicle security.
Mm-hmm.
And just a second. They had to do these changes in their lifestyles. Like they stopped going out at nights, for example, and they changed their children's schools. They changed their businesses. Like these numbers are around half of the participants or more than half of the participants. And maybe one of the most striking results or finding of our study is the impact on the PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. We used a very well-known scale to measure their level of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and we asked them whether these experiences, these hate crime and hate speech experiences, led to a trauma on them through a 20-item scale. And we know that to diagnose someone with PTSD, they need to score more than 40 out of 80 in this scale. And the average level of PTSD score among our participants was 53 out of 80, so which is a very high level of PTSD. And more interestingly, 1/3 of our participants said that their score was more than 60 out of 80, which is a really worrisome level of PTSD as a result of, again, hate speech and hate crimes. And they also said that the use of quote unquote FETO hate speech against them incites attacks and hatred against them. Like 94% said that this FETO label incites attacks from the criminal justice system in Turkey. 94% said so. 89% said that this label incited physical attacks against them. And 89% said that these label incited against their attacks against their properties, or online attacks or verbal attacks. So this is very well known now that the political hate rhetoric used by the current Turkish regime, Turkish government, is not staying there within the borders of the country. Now it's following the members of the society, this community, even in a very safe country like Canada. And these people don't feel safe here. And again, like mental health impacts. Maybe we can talk about the community level in the second part.
Exactly, because the numbers there at the individual level already are quite remarkable, especially given the fact that you're getting these statistics from over 300 participants, which, like you are saying, is quite a representative number, basically. So it's really interesting to see how the percentages are so high, regardless. But like you said, can we maybe then talk a little bit about the community level impact as well, and how the findings reflected in that level?
Sure. Maybe before that, I just want to quickly mention the importance of this kind of research in criminology. Like as a criminologist, I can say that like police reported crimes does not represent, or the stats given by the police do not represent the real crime numbers. When we look at the Canadian Statistics Canada numbers of crime, like police reported crime versus victim surveys, there's a huge gap. Like only 1/3 of the whole crime experienced by victims are reported to police. There's a victim survey done by the Statistics Canada, like victims self-report their experiences in those surveys. When we compare the numbers with the police reported crimes, there is a huge gap. The same thing for hate crimes is valid as well. Even then, more than that, like only 20% of the hate crimes are reported in Canada to the police. So this kind of research, which is victims self-report, victimization survey, is really important to understand the scope of the problem. So that's something that I wanted to mention. And the numbers are really important in that sense. At community level, like it's interesting, and it's something that need to be considered seriously by the leaders of the community, leaders of the Hizmet community, because we found that as a result of this hate speech, the people affiliated with the movement started to question their Hizmet identity. Like 55% of the participants said that this label, this FETÖ label, caused them to question their Hizmet identity. And 59% said this label created family issues. 52% said that this label, the widespread use of this label led to their children distancing themselves from their family and also from the Hizmet institutions and activities. So basically the new generations, the children of the Hizmet people are distancing themselves from the movement, from the institutions and activities because of the widespread use of this label, which is understandable, I think, from the perspective of the young people. And again, the Hizmet institutions, another problem is the support towards the establishments and institutions are decreasing because of the use of this label. Like 90% of the participants said that the label provokes assaults against the Hizmet establishments. And 82% said that not the young people, but the Hizmet supporters in general refrain from engaging with Hizmet institutions and activities due to this label. And 97% said that the members face exclusion from the Turkish society as a whole because of the use of this label. And again, more findings about the community level impacts. 90% of the participants said that, again, they are distancing themselves from the Hizmet institutions and activities. 28% think that Hizmet supporters are marginalized in Canadian society, again, which is, although the number is a little bit lower than the others, like in 28%, still an important finding. Like some people feel that they are marginalized even in the Canadian society because of the use of this label. Like despite the 10,000 kilometers distance from Turkey, like the label is coming from that part of the world, but now here in Canada, which is one of the safest places on earth, they feel unsafe and they feel marginalized, which is a really important thing to look at. Yeah, that's the community levels that I can say.
I mean, there's a lot more to talk about these findings, plus, like you said, two other levels that we have to be addressing. But since we're approaching the end of this episode, I think we'll leave it here for this one. And in our next episode, we would like to first of all continue the other two levels, which we haven't been able to touch upon yet, and then maybe talk a little bit about the relevance of this research and what it means for us here in Canada, both for this community that you conducted the research for, and for the broader public safety aspect within the Canadian community. So we'll get to all of these in the next episode, hopefully. But for today, for this episode at least, thank you for joining us. It was really nice talking to you.
It was a pleasure for me. Thanks for inviting again, Tarek.